The train whistle screamed one last time before the iron beast came to a complete stop. Elena Kowalski pressed her face against the dusty window and saw a small wooden sign that read, Clearwater, Montana. Her heart hammered in her chest like a bird trying to escape its cage. She had been on this train for 3 long days, watching America roll past her window. First, the busy cities of the East, then endless farmland, and now this wild, empty country that seemed to stretch forever. The other passengers had gotten off at bigger towns along the way, leaving Elena mostly alone with her thoughts and fears. In her worn cloth bag, she carried everything she owned in the world. 2 dresses, 1 pair of good shoes, her mother's, silver cross, and a small bundle of letters tied with blue ribbon. Those letters were from Thomas Whitman, a rancher who had promised her a new life as his wife. She had read each letter so many times that the paper was soft as cloth. Elena stepped down from the train, her legs shaky after the long journey. The wooden platform was rough under her feet, and dust swirled around her long skirt. The air smelled different here, dry and wild, nothing like the crowded streets of Chicago where she had lived for 2 years after coming from Poland. About 20 people stood on the platform, all staring at her with curious eyes. She recognized Thomas immediately from the photograph he had sent. He was a tall man with brown hair and serious eyes, wearing a clean white shirt and dark pants. He looked exactly like his picture, but somehow colder. Elena walked toward him, her heart beating so fast she thought everyone could hear it. She had practiced this moment in her mind 100 times during the train ride. "Mr. Whitman," she said, her Polish accent making the words sound different than she wanted. "I am Elena Kowalski." The man's face changed the moment she spoke. His friendly smile disappeared like a candle being blown out. His eyes grew narrow and she saw something that made her stomach drop. Disappointment. "You're the woman who answered my advertisement?" Thomas asked, his voice cold as winter wind. "Yes, sir. I come from Chicago like I write in my letters," Elena said, trying to speak carefully. But the more nervous she got, the thicker her accent became. The words felt clumsy in her mouth, like stones she couldn't swallow. The people on the platform began to whisper among themselves. Elena caught pieces of their words. Foreign. Can't hardly understand her. What was Thomas thinking? Their stares felt like needles pricking her skin. An older woman with gray hair and a sharp face stepped forward. "Thomas, dear, perhaps there's been some mistake," she said, looking Elena up and down like she was inspecting a horse at market. Thomas cleared his throat. "Elena, we need to talk, privately." He picked up her small bag and started walking toward a wagon without waiting to see if she followed. Elena hurried after him, her shoes clicking on the wooden planks. She felt every eye on the platform watching her, judging her, finding her wanting. This wasn't how she had imagined her arrival. In her dreams, Thomas had been kind and welcoming. He had taken her hand and told her she was home. The wagon ride to Thomas's ranch was the longest 15 minutes of Elena's life. He didn't speak to her at all, just stared straight ahead at the dusty road. The only sounds were the horse's hooves and the wagon wheels turning. Elena tried to start conversation several times. "The country here, it is very beautiful," she said, looking at the rolling hills and wide sky. Thomas just nodded without looking at her. "In my letters you write about cattle. How many you have?" She tried again. "Some," was all he said. By the time they reached his ranch, Elena's hope was dying like a fire running out of wood. The ranch was nice enough, a 2-story wooden house, with a wide porch, several barns and fences stretching into the distance. But the silence between them made everything feel cold and unwelcoming. Thomas stopped the wagon in front of the house and finally looked at her. "Elena, I need to be honest with you. When I placed that advertisement for a wife, I expected someone different." "Different how?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. "Someone who speaks proper English. Someone who can talk to my neighbors and business partners without embarrassing me. Someone who fits in here." His words hit her like slaps across the face. Elena felt her cheeks burn with shame. "I learn English every day. I get better. In Poland, I speak 3 languages. Here I only need to learn one more. But Thomas was already shaking his head. It's not just the language. It's everything. The way you dress, the way you carry yourself. This is a respectable community, Elena. I need a wife who can be a proper American lady. I can be what you need, Elena said, hearing the desperation in her own voice. I cook good. I clean. I work hard. I can learn American ways. Thomas looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to be anywhere else. I'm sure you're a fine woman, but this arrangement isn't going to work. I'll pay for your room at the boarding house for a few days while you figure out what to do next. Elena stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. She had spent every penny she had on the train ticket. She had left behind everything familiar to come to this place. She had dreamed of building a life with this man, and he was dismissing her like a servant who couldn't do the job. Please, she whispered. I have nowhere to go. For a moment, Thomas's face softened, and Elena thought maybe he would change his mind. But then he straightened up and his expression became hard again. I'm sorry, Elena, I truly am. But I can't marry someone I can't even have a proper conversation with. Mrs. Henderson runs the boarding house on Main Street. She's a good woman. She'll help you figure things out. The ride to the boarding house was even quieter than the ride to the ranch. Elena sat in the wagon feeling like her whole world was crumbling around her. She had been so sure that America would be her fresh start, her chance at happiness. Instead, she felt more alone than ever. Mrs. Henderson was a thin woman with kind eyes and work-worn hands. She looked at Elena with pity when Thomas explained the situation. Well, I suppose she can stay for a few days, Mrs. Henderson said. Lord knows we've all had our share of troubles. Thomas paid for 3 days and left without saying goodbye. Elena stood in the small, plain room that was now her only home in America, looking out the window at a town where she knew no one, and no one wanted to know her. That night, she lay on the narrow bed and cried quietly into her pillow. She thought about her sister Anna back in Chicago, who had warned her that mail-order marriages were risky. She thought about her mother in Poland, who had died believing Elena would find happiness in America. But mostly, she thought about Thomas's words. I can't marry someone I can't even have a proper conversation with. The words echoed in her mind, making her feel small and worthless. Was her accent really so terrible? Was she really so impossible to understand? Elena had always been proud of learning English as well as she had. In Chicago, the other Polish immigrants praised her for picking up the language so quickly. But, here in Montana, her accent marked her as an outsider, someone who didn't belong. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Elena wondered if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. She was thousands of miles from anyone who cared about her, with almost no money and no plan for the future, all because her voice didn't sound the way Americans expected it to sound. The last thing she heard before sleep took her was the sound of her own voice echoing in her memory, speaking those first hopeful words to Thomas. I am Elena. Words that had sealed her fate and broken her dreams all at once. Elena woke up on her second day in Clearwater feeling like she had swallowed rocks. The sunlight streaming through the thin curtains reminded her that yesterday hadn't been a nightmare. She really was stuck in a strange town with no husband, no home, and almost no money. Mrs. Henderson knocked softly on her door. Elena, dear, I've made breakfast. Come down when you're ready. Elena dressed quickly in her better dress and tried to fix her hair in the small cracked mirror. She looked pale and tired, but there was nothing to be done about it. Downstairs, the boarding house dining room was full of people eating breakfast. Conversation stopped when Elena appeared. Everyone stared at her like she was some kind of strange animal in a zoo. Mrs. Henderson put a plate of eggs and bacon in front of her. Don't mind them, she whispered. Small towns love to gossip, but they'll find something else to talk about soon enough. But Elena knew that wasn't true. She could feel their stares and hear their whispered comments. Poor thing came all this way for nothing. Thomas sure didn't waste any time sending her packing. Can't blame him, though. How's he supposed to take her to church socials sounding like that? Elena tried to eat, but the food tasted like sawdust in her mouth. She excused herself and went back upstairs, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Later that morning, Mrs. Henderson knocked on her door again. "Elena, I hate to bring this up, but Thomas only paid for 3 days. That leaves you with tomorrow night. Do you have any plans?" Elena's stomach dropped. She had been trying not to think about what would happen when the 3 days were up. I write letter to my sister in Chicago. Maybe she send money for train ticket." Mrs. Henderson looked at her with pity. "Well, until then, if you want to help with the cooking and cleaning, I could let you stay a few more days. I can't pay you much, but it would cover your room and meals." Elena nodded quickly. It wasn't much, but it was something. At least she wouldn't be sleeping in the street. Working at the boarding house was harder than Elena expected. Not because the work was difficult. She had done much harder jobs in Chicago. The problem was the people. Every day, men came to eat breakfast and dinner. They were ranch hands, shopkeepers, and drifters passing through town. Most of them treated Elena like she was invisible. They would ask Mrs. Henderson for more coffee or another biscuit, even when Elena was standing right next to them. Others were worse. They would ask her questions just to hear her accent, then laugh when she answered. "Hey, Polish girl, say something. In your language," one cowboy called out during dinner. "It sounds like you're choking on something." His friends laughed loudly. Elena kept her head down and continued serving food, pretending she didn't hear them. The worst part was going into town to buy supplies for the boarding house. The first time Mrs. Henderson sent her to the general store, Elena thought it would be nice to get out and see the town. She was wrong. Mr. Peterson, who owned the store, looked annoyed the moment she opened her mouth. "What do you need?" he asked impatiently, drumming his fingers on the counter. Elena pulled out the list Mrs. Henderson had written. "I need flour, sugar, and coffee, please." "Flour, sugar, and coffee," Mr. Peterson repeated, making her accent sound even worse than it was. "Anything else? Or can you manage to tell me the whole list at once?" Elena felt her face get hot. "That is all, sir." While Mr. Peterson gathered her items, 2 women came into the store. Elena recognized them from church. She had started attending Sunday services hoping to make friends. The women saw her and immediately began whispering to each other. "That's the Polish girl who was supposed to marry Thomas Whitman," one said, not bothering to lower her voice much. "Poor Thomas, can you imagine being married to someone you can't understand half the time? She seems nice enough, but really, what was he thinking? A man in his position needs a wife who can speak properly." Elena pretended to be very interested in a display of ribbons while the women continued talking about her like she wasn't there. When Mr. Peterson finally had her supplies ready, she paid quickly and left without looking at anyone. Walking back to the boarding house, she passed a group of children playing in the street. When they saw her coming, they started giggling and whispering among themselves. As she got closer, one of them called out in a mocking voice, "Hello, my name is Elena," making her accent sound ridiculous. The other children burst into laughter. Elena hurried past them, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall. Every day was like this. At the boarding house, she was ignored or mocked. In town, she was stared at and whispered about. At church, people were polite but distant. No one seemed interested in getting to know her as a person. They only saw her accent, her foreign ways, her differentness. Elena began to hate the sound of her own voice. She started speaking as little as possible, just nodding or shaking her head when people asked her questions. But even her silence seemed to mark her as strange. 3 weeks after her arrival, Thomas Whitman came to the boarding house for dinner. Elena was serving food when she saw him sit down at his usual table. Her hands shook as she carried his plate to him. "Evening, Elena," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "How are you settling in?" "Fine, thank you," she said, quietly, setting down his plate and starting to turn away. "Elena, wait." Thomas looked uncomfortable. "I've been thinking about our situation. Maybe I was too hasty in my decision." Elena's heart jumped. Maybe he had changed his mind. Maybe he realized they could make it work. "I've been talking to some people in town," Thomas continued. "There's a family in Denver who might need a housekeeper. They don't mind foreign girls, apparently. I could pay for your train ticket." Elena stared at him. He wasn't offering to marry her. He was trying to get rid of her completely, to send her away where she wouldn't be his problem anymore. I don't want to be housekeeper, Elena said, her accent thick with emotion. I come here to be wife, to have family, to belong somewhere. Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Elena, you have to understand. This is a small town. People talk. It reflects on me, having brought you here and then, well, you know. If you stayed in Denver, you could start fresh. No one would know about this unfortunate situation. Elena felt something break inside her chest. Unfortunate situation, she repeated. That is what I am to you? Now don't take it personally, Thomas said. You seem like a good woman. You're just not suitable for this place. Elena turned and walked away without another word. She went upstairs to her small room and sat on the bed, staring out the window at the town that didn't want her. She thought about accepting Thomas's offer. Denver was a big city. Maybe she could disappear into it and find some kind of life for herself. But the thought of running away again, of admitting defeat, made her feel sick. That night, Elena wrote a letter to her sister Anna in Chicago. She tried to make it sound like everything was fine, like she was just having a small setback. But as she wrote, tears dripped onto the paper, smearing the ink. Dear Anna, she began. America is not what I expected. The people here are not like the people in Chicago. They do not understand that someone can be different but still good. I do not know what I will do. I am lost. Elena sealed the letter and placed it on her small table. She would mail it tomorrow, and maybe Anna would send money for a train ticket. Maybe she would go back to Chicago and work in the factories again. Maybe she would save up money and go back to Poland, where at least people understood her when she spoke. But as she lay in bed that night, Elena felt something stubborn growing inside her chest. She had come too far to give up now. She had crossed an ocean and half a continent to get here. She had survived leaving everything she knew behind. She would not let Thomas Whitman and the people of Clearwater defeat her without a fight, even if she didn't know what that fight would look like yet. Elena had been in Clearwater for almost a month when she first noticed him. It was early morning, and she was struggling to carry 2 heavy buckets of water from the well behind the boarding house. The buckets were old, and the handles cut into her hands. But Mrs. Henderson needed the water for washing, and Elena was the only one available to fetch it. She had made it halfway to the back door when her arms gave out. Water sloshed everywhere as she set the buckets down, her hands cramping and her back aching. She looked at the remaining distance to the house and wondered how she would manage it. Ma'am? Elena turned around, startled. A man stood near the well, hat in his hands. He was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and brown hair that needed cutting. She had seen him around town before. He worked different ranches and kept to himself mostly. People called him Dutch, though she didn't know. His real name? I'm sorry to bother you, he said, his voice quiet and gentle, but those buckets look mighty heavy. Would you mind if I helped? Elena stared at him in surprise. No one in Clearwater had offered to help her with anything since she arrived. Most people acted like she didn't exist. Yes, thank you, she said, stepping back from the buckets. Dutch picked up both buckets like they weighed nothing and carried them to the back door of the boarding house. He set them down carefully, then touched his hat brim. Have a good day, ma'am, he said, and walked away before Elena could thank him properly. The next morning, Elena went out to get water again. She was surprised to find Dutch already there, filling buckets at the well. Morning, ma'am, he said when he saw her. I was just getting some water for my horse and thought I might as well fill these for the boarding house too. Elena watched him carry the heavy buckets to the back door like it was no trouble at all. Thank you, she said. You are very kind. Dutch touched his hat again and started to leave, then stopped. Ma'am? I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you the lady who came here to marry Thomas Whitman? Elena felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Yes, but that did not work out. Dutch nodded slowly. I figured as much seeing you working here. I'm sorry it didn't work out for you. There was something different about the way he said it. He didn't sound like he was gossiping or judging. He just sounded sorry for her troubles. Thank you, Elena said again, not sure what else to say. This became their morning routine. Dutch would appear just as Elena was getting ready to fetch water, and he would carry the heavy buckets for her. They didn't talk much at first, just good morning, and thank you and have a good day. But slowly, Dutch began to linger a little longer each morning. He would ask about the weather, or comment on how the flowers in Mrs. Henderson's garden were coming along. Elena began to look forward to these brief conversations. Dutch never seemed impatient when she searched for the right English words. He never made faces when her accent was thick. He just listened. One morning in late September, Elena was sweeping the front porch when she heard shouting from the street. Two men were arguing loudly about a card game, and the argument was getting heated. One of them pushed the other, and soon they were rolling around in the dirt, throwing punches. People came out of shops to watch the fight. Some were cheering, some were placing bets on who would win. Elena had never seen anything like it and didn't know what to do. Then she saw Dutch walking down the street. He took one look at the fighting men and sighed. Without saying a word, he waded into the fight and pulled the two men apart like they were children. "That's enough," he said calmly. "Jake, you're drunk. Go home and sleep it off. Tommy, you know better than to play cards with Jake when he's been drinking." Both men looked ashamed. They mumbled apologies and went their separate ways. The crowd dispersed, disappointed that the excitement was over. Elena found herself impressed by how Dutch had handled the situation. He hadn't used violence or harsh words. He had just been calm and firm, and somehow that had been enough. That evening, Dutch appeared on the boarding house porch as Elena was sitting outside after finishing her work. This was new. He had never come by in the evening before. "Evening, ma'am," he said, taking off his hat. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I saw that fight today and wanted to make sure it didn't upset you too much." "It was surprising," Elena admitted. "In Poland, men fight sometimes, but not in the street, like that." Dutch sat down on the porch steps, a respectful distance away from Elena's chair. "Jake's not a bad man when he's sober, but whiskey makes him think everyone's cheating him at cards." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Finally, Dutch spoke again. "If you don't mind me asking, what was Poland like? I've never met anyone from so far away before." Elena was surprised by the question. Most people in Clearwater acted like they didn't want to know anything about her past, but Dutch seemed genuinely curious. "It was beautiful," she said slowly, thinking of how to explain in English. "Green hills, thick forests. My family had small farm. We grow potatoes, cabbage, some wheat." "Sounds nice," Dutch said. "What made you decide to come to America?" Elena hesitated. It was a long story, and not all of it was happy, but something about Dutch's quiet manner made her want to tell him. "My husband died," she said. "We were married only 2 years. After that, life was very hard. My husband's family, they take the farm. They say woman cannot run farm alone. I go to live with my sister, but her husband, he did not want me there." Dutch listened without interrupting, his face serious but kind. "So I come to Chicago, work in factory," Elena continued. "But factory work is hard and pay is small. I think maybe if I marry, I can have better life. Have family again. Have home." "That took a lot of courage," Dutch said. "Leaving everything you knew behind." Elena looked at him in surprise. No one had ever called her brave before. Most people seemed to think she was either desperate or foolish. "You think so?" she asked. "I know so," Dutch said firmly. "I've never been further from home than Denver, and that's only a few days' ride. You traveled across the whole world to start over. That's about the bravest thing I can imagine." Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but for once they were good tears. Someone understood. Someone saw her as more than just a foreign woman with a thick accent. "Thank you," she whispered. "No one has said such things to me since I come here." Dutch was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Elena, that's your name, right? Elena, I hope. You don't mind me saying this, but I think the people in this town are fools. You seem like a fine woman to me. Any man would be lucky to have you for a wife." Elena stared at him in amazement. In all her weeks in Clearwater, no one had spoken to her with such kindness and respect. "You really think this?" she asked. Dutch met her eyes directly. "I really think this. And I'll tell you something else. When you talk, when you tell stories about Poland, your voice sounds like music to me. Different music than I'm used to, maybe, but beautiful all the same." Elena felt her heart skip a beat. "My voice? But everyone here, they say my accent is bad. They say I talk wrong." Dutch shook his head. "They're wrong. Your voice is like a song from someplace far away. It makes me think about how big the world is, how many different kinds of people there are. It makes everything seem softer, somehow." Elena couldn't speak. No one had ever said anything so beautiful to her, not even her first husband. She sat there looking at this quiet cowboy who saw beauty, where others saw only problems. "I should probably go," Dutch said, standing up and putting his hat back on. "Don't want to keep you from your rest, but Elena, I hope you'll stay in Clearwater. I hope you won't let people like Thomas Whitman chase you away. This town needs someone like you, even if most folks are too stubborn to see it." He touched his hat brim and walked away into the gathering darkness. Elena sat on the porch for a long time after he left, thinking about what he had said. For the first time since arriving in Clearwater, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she might find a place to belong after all. And it all started with a simple act of kindness, a quiet cowboy offering to carry heavy buckets for a lonely foreign woman who had almost given up hope. October came to Clearwater with golden leaves and crisp mornings that reminded Elena of Poland. Her friendship with Dutch had grown slowly but steadily. He still helped her with the heavy work at the boarding house, but now their conversations lasted longer. Sometimes he would stay on the porch after his work was done, and they would talk about everything and nothing. Dutch told her stories about growing up on a ranch in Wyoming, about learning to rope cattle and break horses. Elena shared memories of harvest festivals in her village, of her grandmother's herb garden, and the songs her mother used to sing while baking bread. "Your grandmother sounds like she was a wise woman," Dutch said one evening after Elena had told him about the old woman's knowledge of healing plants. "She was," Elena agreed. "She teach me many things. How to make tea for fever, poultice for cuts, syrup for cough. In Poland, people come to her when doctor too far away or cost too much money." Dutch looked interested. "Do you remember much of what she taught you?" Elena nodded. "I remember most things. But here I do not use. People here, they have doctor. They do not trust foreign remedies." "That's too bad," Dutch said. "Knowledge like that shouldn't go to waste." Elena didn't think much about their conversation until a few days later, when Mrs. Henderson came down with a terrible cold. The older woman was miserable, coughing and sneezing, her nose red and raw. "I feel like I've been trampled by horses," Mrs. Henderson complained, her voice hoarse. "Dr. Wilson's out of town visiting his sick brother, and I don't know when he'll be back." Elena watched Mrs. Henderson struggle through her work, and her heart ached for the woman who had been kind to her when no one else would. That evening, she approached her employer hesitantly. "Mrs. Henderson, I know something that might help your cold. My grandmother teach me to make special tea. It help with cough and make breathing easier." Mrs. Henderson looked at her skeptically. "What kind of tea?" Elena tried to think of the English words for the herbs. "Willow bark for pain, elderberry for fever, and I do not know English word. We call it mother's breath in Poland. It grows by streams, has small white flowers." "You mean meadowsweet?" Mrs. Henderson asked, looking surprised. "My own grandmother used to make tea with meadowsweet." "Yes, that is the name. If you let me, I go find these plants and make tea. Cannot hurt to try, yes?" Mrs. Henderson considered this. She was feeling terrible, and Dr. Wilson might not be back for days. "I suppose it couldn't hurt. But where would you find these plants around here?" Elena had been quietly noting the local plants during her walks around town. Living in the countryside in Poland had taught her to recognize useful herbs wherever she went. "I see willow trees by creek," she said, "and elderberries grow behind Miller's farm. For meadowsweet, I think. Maybe in wet places near river. The next morning, Elena set out early with a basket to gather the plants she needed. Dutch appeared as she was heading toward the creek. Going somewhere special? He asked. Elena explained about Mrs. Henderson's cold and her plan to make healing tea. Dutch listened with interest. Mind if I come along? I know all the best spots around here, and some of those plants can be tricky to find. With Dutch's help, Elena found everything she needed. He showed her where the best willow trees grew and led her to a marshy area by the river where meadowsweet bloomed in abundance. While she carefully selected and gathered her plants, Dutch asked questions about how she would prepare them. My grandmother always say, "Harvest with respect," Elena explained as she carefully cut willow bark. Take only what you need, and always leave plenty for plant to stay healthy. Plants want to help people, but we must not be greedy. Back at the boarding house, Elena prepared her tea carefully, just as her grandmother had taught her. She stripped the willow bark into thin pieces, crushed the elderberries, and chopped the meadowsweet leaves. Then she boiled water and let everything steep together until the kitchen filled with a pleasant, earthy smell. Mrs. Henderson was skeptical when Elena brought her the steaming cup, but she was desperate enough to try anything. She took a cautious sip, then another. "It tastes actually quite nice," she said, surprised. "Sort of sweet and flowery." Elena had her drink a cup of the tea 3 times that day. By evening, Mrs. Henderson's cough was noticeably better, and she seemed to be breathing easier. "I don't know if it's your tea or just time," Mrs. Henderson said, "but I do feel better. Could you make me some more for tomorrow?" Word of Mrs. Henderson's improvement spread quietly through the boarding house. The next evening, one of the regular guests, an older man named Mr. Foster, approached Elena. "Excuse me, miss," he said quietly. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned you made some kind of tea that helped her cold. I've got this pain in my joints that's been bothering me something fierce. Don't suppose you know anything that might help?" Elena thought about this. In Poland, her grandmother had treated joint pain with a tea made from nettle and dandelion. She had seen both plants growing wild around Clearwater. "Maybe I can help," she said carefully. "I make different tea, good for pain and joints. You want to try?" Mr. Foster nodded eagerly. His arthritis had been getting worse with the cooler weather, and Dr. Wilson's medicines were expensive. Elena prepared the joint pain tea the next day, and Mr. Foster tried it faithfully. Within a few days, he was moving more easily and complaining less about his aches. "Don't know what's in that tea of yours," he told Elena, "but it's working better than anything Dr. Wilson ever gave me." Soon, other people began quietly asking Elena for help with minor ailments. A kitchen maid with terrible headaches found relief in Elena's feverfew tea. A traveling salesman with stomach troubles felt better after drinking chamomile and mint tea Elena prepared for him. Elena was careful to only help with simple problems, the kind of things her grandmother would have treated. For anything serious, she insisted people see Dr. Wilson. But for common colds, headaches, upset stomachs, and minor aches and pains, her teas and poultices seemed to help. The real test came when little Amy Patterson, the blacksmith's daughter, fell ill with a high fever. Dr. Wilson was still out of town and the child's parents were frantic. Amy's mother, Rebecca, had heard about Elena's healing teas from Mrs. Henderson. "Please," Rebecca begged, tears in her eyes. "Amy's burning up with fever and I don't know what to do. Mrs. Henderson says you helped her when she was sick. Could you look at my little girl?" Elena was frightened. A child's high fever was serious, not something to treat lightly. But Dr. Wilson was still days away, and the little girl was clearly very sick. "I can try," Elena said, "but if she get worse, you must send for doctor right away, even if he far." Elena examined little Amy carefully. The child was indeed burning with fever, but her breathing was clear and she was alert when awake. Elena recognized the signs. It looked like the childhood fevers she had seen many times in Poland. She prepared a gentle tea from willow bark and elderberry to bring down the fever, and made cool compresses for Amy's forehead. She also had Rebecca give the child small sips of water with honey to prevent dehydration. Elena stayed with the Patterson family for 2 days, monitoring Amy's fever and adjusting her treatments. Slowly, the child's temperature came down and her appetite returned. When Dr. Wilson finally returned to town, Amy was sitting up in bed eating soup and asking for her favorite doll. "I don't know what you did," Dr. Wilson told Elena after examining the child, "but you handled this exactly right. The fever broke naturally, and she's going to be fine." Word spread quickly through Clearwater about how Elena had helped save little Amy Patterson. Suddenly, people who had ignored her for months were looking at her with new respect. "That Polish girl really knows her business," Elena heard Mrs. Morton tell her friend at the general store. "Maybe there's something to those foreign remedies. After all." Even Mr. Peterson at the general store began treating Elena differently. When she came in to buy supplies, he was polite and patient, no longer acting annoyed by her accent. But the biggest change was in how Elena felt about herself. For the first time since arriving in Clearwater, she felt useful. Her grandmother's knowledge, which had seemed worthless in this new country, was actually helping people. Dutch noticed the change in her immediately. "You look different," he told her one evening, as they sat on the boarding house porch. "Happier." Elena smiled. "I feel different. I feel like maybe I belong here a little bit. People still think my accent is strange, but now they think maybe I have something useful to offer too." Dutch reached over and took her hand gently. "I told you this town needed someone like you. I'm glad you're finally starting to see it yourself." Elena looked at their joined hands, feeling her heart beat faster. "Dutch, I want to thank you. If you had not been kind to me, if you had not helped me see that I have value, I think maybe I would have given up and gone back to Chicago." Dutch squeezed her hand softly. "Elena, I need to tell you something. These past weeks, getting to know you, seeing how strong and wise and gentle you are, I've fallen in love with you." Elena's breath caught. "You have?" "Completely," Dutch said simply. "Your voice, your kindness, your courage, everything about you. You make the whole world seem softer and more beautiful just by being in it." Elena felt tears of joy spring to her eyes. "I love you too, Dutch. I did not think I could love again after my husband." November brought the first snow to Clearwater, and with it came wedding plans. Elena and Dutch had decided to marry before Christmas, when the worst of winter set in. It would be a simple ceremony, but Elena found herself happier than she had ever imagined possible. The change in how people treated her continued to grow. Women who had once whispered about her behind their hands now stopped her on the street to ask about remedies for their families. The general store began stocking some of the herbs Elena used most often, and Mr. Peterson always set aside the best quality plants for her. Mrs. Henderson had become like a mother to Elena. One evening in late November, she sat Elena down for a serious talk. "My dear," she said, "I need to tell you something. I've been thinking about my future, and I'm getting too old to run this boarding house alone. I've been looking for someone to take over for me." Elena felt a stab of worry. If Mrs. Henderson sold the boarding house, where would Elena live until she married Dutch? "I want you and Dutch to have it," Mrs. Henderson continued. "You've worked harder than anyone could ask, and you've brought something special to this place. I've seen how you care for people, how you make them feel welcome and heal their hurts. This place needs someone like you running it." Elena stared at her in shock. "You want to give us the boarding house?" "Not give, sell, but for a fair price that you and Dutch can manage. I've saved up enough to buy a little cottage closer to my daughter in Denver. But I want to know this place will be in good hands, your hands." Elena felt tears spring to her eyes. "Mrs. Henderson, I do not know what to say. This is too generous." "Nonsense," Mrs. Henderson said briskly. "You've earned it. Besides, I think you and Dutch will make this place into something even better than it is now. A real home for people passing through, not just a place to sleep." That evening, Elena told Dutch about Mrs. Henderson's offer. They sat by the fireplace in the boarding house parlor, planning their future together. "It's perfect," Dutch said, holding Elena's hands. "We can run the boarding house together. I can help with the heavy work and repairs. And you can do what you do best, taking care of people. But Dutch, what about your work at the ranches? You love working with cattle and horses." Dutch smiled. "Elena, I love you more than any job. And besides, there's plenty of work to be done around a boarding house. I can still help ranchers when they need extra hands, but this would give us a real home base. As December approached, Elena found herself busier than ever. Word of her healing skills had spread beyond Clearwater. People from neighboring towns began making special trips to see her, bringing their sick family members or asking for remedies to take home. One snowy morning, Elena was in the kitchen preparing a batch of cough syrup when she heard a commotion outside. She looked out the window to see Thomas Whitman climbing down from his wagon. Elena's stomach tightened. She hadn't spoken to Thomas since the day he had offered to send her away to Denver. What could he want now? Mrs. Henderson showed him into the parlor, and Elena reluctantly went to see what he needed. Thomas stood awkwardly near the fireplace, hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable. "Hello, Elena," he said. "I hope you're well." "I am fine, thank you," Elena replied coolly. "What do you need?" Thomas shifted his feet. "Actually, I came to ask for your help. My ranch foreman, Pete, he's been laid up for a week with some kind of lung trouble. Dr. Wilson's been treating him, but he's not getting any better. I heard, well, everyone's talking about how you helped little Amy Patterson and others. I was wondering if you might look at Pete." Elena was amazed. The man who had rejected her for her accent was now asking for her help. "Dr. Wilson cannot help him?" "Doc's doing his best, but Pete just keeps getting worse. He's coughing up blood now and we're all worried. I know I don't have any right to ask you for favors, but Pete's got a wife and 3 children. If there's anything you can do." Elena studied Thomas's face. He looked genuinely worried about his foreman, and she had always believed that healing should never be withheld out of personal feelings. "I will come and look at him," she said. "But I make no promises. If he is very sick, he may need doctor, not herb tea." Thomas looked relieved. "Thank you, Elena. I'll drive you out to the ranch." The ride to Thomas's ranch was quiet, but not as uncomfortable as Elena had expected. When they arrived, Thomas led her to the foreman's house, a small cabin behind the main ranch house. Pete's wife, Carol, met them at the door. She looked exhausted and frightened. "Oh, thank goodness," she said when Thomas explained why Elena was there. "I've been so scared. Pete can barely breathe, and the children are asking why Daddy won't get out of bed." Elena examined Pete carefully. He was running a high fever and had a deep, rattling cough that brought up blood-tinged sputum. His breathing was labored, and Elena could hear congestion in his lungs when she listened to his chest. "How long has he been like this?" Elena asked. "Carol, about 10 days now. It started as a regular cold, but then it got worse and worse." Elena recognized the symptoms. In Poland, she had seen this kind of lung infection before. It was serious but not hopeless if treated correctly. "He has infection deep in lungs," Elena told Carol and Thomas. "Very serious, but I think I can help. I need to make special steam treatment and strong tea. Will take several days of treatment." Elena sent Thomas back to town to get Dutch and her medical supplies. She spent the next 3 days at the ranch treating Pete with steam inhalations made from eucalyptus and pine needles, and giving him powerful teas made from lungwort and coltsfoot to fight the infection. Slowly, Pete's fever broke and his breathing became easier. By the 4th day, he was sitting up in bed asking for solid food. "I don't know how to thank you," Carol said, tears streaming down her face. The doctor said, if Pete didn't improve soon, we should prepare for the worst. You saved his life. Thomas walked Elena out to his wagon for the ride back to town. He was quiet for a long time, then finally spoke. "Elena, I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually." Elena looked at him but didn't say anything. "When you first arrived, I judged you based on your accent, on how different you seemed. I thought I needed a wife who could fit into my idea of what was proper and respectable. I was wrong." Thomas stopped the wagon and turned to face her. "You're twice the woman I thought I needed. You're intelligent, skilled, compassionate, and strong. Any man would be lucky to have you as a wife. Dutch Sullivan is the luckiest man in Montana." Elena was surprised by his sincerity. "Thank you, Thomas. That means much to me. I hope you can forgive me for the way I treated you. I let my pride and my narrow ideas about what was acceptable blind me to what was really important." Elena considered this. She had been angry with Thomas for months, but holding on to anger seemed pointless now. She had found something much better than what he could have offered her. "I forgive you," she said. "Maybe things happen the way they are supposed to happen. If you had married me, I might never have met Dutch. And Dutch loves me exactly as I am." Thomas nodded. "He's a good man. You two will be happy together." Word of how Elena had saved Pete's life spread quickly through the county. When she and Dutch were married on December 15th in the small white church on Main Street, the ceremony was attended by nearly the whole town and several families from neighboring communities. Elena wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, and Dutch wore his best suit. Pastor Johnson performed the ceremony, and when Dutch kissed his bride, the congregation erupted in cheers and applause. At the reception in the boarding house dining room, people came up to congratulate the couple and share stories of how Elena had helped them or their families. "To Elena and Dutch," toasted Dr. Wilson, raising his glass. "Elena, you've brought something special to our community. Your knowledge, your kindness, and your healing touch have made all our lives better. We're lucky to have you." The room erupted, in agreement, and Elena felt her heart swell with happiness. 6 months ago she had been an unwanted foreigner. Now she was a valued member of the community, married to a man who loved her completely. Later that evening, as the last guests were leaving, Dutch found Elena on the porch where they had spent so many evenings talking and falling in love. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her. Elena leaned back against his chest and looked out at the snow-covered town that had become her home. "More happy than I ever dreamed possible," she said in her accent that Dutch loved so much. "You know what I love most about you?" Dutch said, his voice soft in her ear. "What?" "Your voice. It still sounds like music to me, like a song that makes everything softer and more beautiful. I hope you never lose that accent, Elena. It's part of what makes you special." Elena turned in his arms and kissed him. "I love you, Dutch Sullivan. Thank you for seeing who I really was when everyone else only saw what was different about me." "I love you too, Elena Sullivan," Dutch said, and Elena thrilled to hear her new name. "And I can't wait to spend the rest of our lives together, taking care of people and making this place feel like home for everyone who needs it." As they stood together on the porch of their boarding house, Elena reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her here. She had crossed an ocean and half a continent, faced rejection and loneliness, and nearly given up hope. But she had also discovered strengths she didn't